Hello everyone. So there's something I wanted to talk about for a long time now. I just never felt like I had enough to say for an entire video, but I thought about the topic more recently and I realized I have a lot more to say about this than I initially thought. So I'm talking about tacked on multiplayer games. Now what do I mean by tacked on? A tacked on multiplayer to me means a game that is shipped primarily for a reason other than multiplayer. So, you know, a single player game or a co-op game. And you whip up a low budget multiplayer with not many resources put into it. A multiplayer that you don't buy the game for, you know? A component of the game that is just a little extra piece for you to enjoy rather than the main attraction, hence the term tacked on. Now, before you say, that's lazy, that's stupid, listen to what I have to say. So, first of all, 95% of all games now are single player or co-op or multiplayer. There's little to no overlap of these, meaning games that have one of these things or even all three are unbelievably rare. But it didn't used to be like that. Back in like PS3, 360 era, we got games that had two components like that all the time. And that era is pretty much where tacked on multiplayers were born and died. I miss this era of multiplayer so much, and honestly I think we could really benefit in the modern day from replicating some of that era of gaming when it comes to multiplayer. Nowadays 99% of multiplayer games are just battle royales, and no matter what your opinion of battle royales are, that level of saturation in a genre is never a good thing. Variety is always the better outcome. And honestly, the reason this saturation problem wasn't quite as bad back then, like PS3 360 era, is because of tacked on multiplayers. See, tacked on multiplayers were essentially an extension of the single player, meaning they were usually pretty unique because single player games, especially back then, were usually pretty different from one another to begin with. So when you build a multiplayer off of that single player, you get an extremely unique multiplayer experience, and God, I miss that. Nowadays, we have the worst of both worlds. Most multiplayer games are only multiplayer, so you're overall getting less content from the package, whether it's free or not, and a lot of these companies behind these multiplayer games pour a lot more resources into them, so they take 10 fucking times longer to come out, and if that game is a flop, which believe me, a lot of the time it is, then that's what? 3 years of development and resources minimum literally down the drain, because since there's no other components to the game, i.e. a single player or co-op, people don't like that one thing the game has to offer, that game is dead. You know, that being the multiplayer, so at that point the game is completely done for. Whereas if a game comes out with a single player and a multiplayer and most resources went into the single player and the multiplayer game was complete and utter dog shit, well, you still have the single player. And I'm not saying a single player redeems every game. I'm saying there's a greater chance that if you don't like the multiplayer, you could still enjoy the game. Do you get what I'm saying? And the thing with tacked on multiplayers is that just because a multiplayer is low budget and quote unquote tacked on, doesn't mean it's immediately bad. You never know when a multiplayer might stick. So many games in the past have had a tacked on multiplayer and accidentally made a multiplayer that people really ended up enjoying. A great example of this is Uncharted 2. As I'm sure a lot of you know, Uncharted is all about the single player. And if Uncharted came out today, I'd bet any amount of money that they wouldn't bother including a multiplayer. Uncharted 1 was strictly a single player game. Uncharted 2 actually decided to include a multiplayer, and a lot of people, including myself, loved it, and it stuck. It had a healthy fan base for years, and it ended up getting a bunch of DLC that may not have even been planned. And then furthermore, Uncharted 3 came out a few years later in 2011 and expanded upon the multiplayer in like every way. It had more mechanics, more game modes, more maps, more DLC. It was an evolution in pretty much every way, and it was amazing. And this evolution never would have happened if Naughty Dog, the creators of Uncharted, never included a low budget tacked on multiplayer in Uncharted 2. That is why I miss tacked on multiplayers. So you get my point. The last game I know of that did this was Space Marine 2, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. That game had a multiplayer that was very obviously didn't have too many resources put into it, but it was surprisingly fun, and for the most part people enjoyed it. And who knows, maybe in Space Marine 3, which is already confirmed I believe, they'll put more resources into it and expand upon it, or hell, even make a standalone multiplayer Space Marine game so the wait isn't as long for the next experience. Nowadays, I've more or less completely given up on competitive multiplayer gaming, and I was torn up about that for a while, but I've accepted it at this point. Like, I'm not even mad anymore. I don't like battle royales, and the few games that aren't battle royales have been fucking garbage in my opinion. So I have completely distanced myself from multiplayer, and I've kind of just accepted that this modern age of competitive multiplayer gaming just isn't for me, which is fine. I'm sure someone is gonna call me a boomer or something, but in terms of gaming, yeah, that's not exactly inaccurate. One game I'm not going to say hype for, but I have my eyes on is Battlefield 6, which is a multiplayer game. And the reason for that is because I grew up absolutely loving Battlefield, so I have a soft spot for it, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is because as I follow this next Battlefield game, it seems like after the failures of the last two games, they are finally listening to what the community wants this time. And theoretically, if there's a Battlefield game that captures the feel of the old games I grew up with and is good and stuff, then even someone like me can enjoy a multiplayer game for once. So that is why it's on my radar, at the very least. I would say cautiously optimistic, but that's about it. I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me, but I hope you can at least see things from my perspective at the very least. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.